Hello, everybody. This is part two of our discussion of the modern Benoni defense. The first video, I mentioned that Black had three plans in the classical variation, and in this video, we are going to discuss the second plan. So if you didn't see the first video, I suggest you go back and start from the beginning so that you can have the proper foundation necessary to play this dynamic defense. Okay, so game two is going to feature the development knight a6 and knight c7. And the main idea is to prepare the move b5. An added benefit of having the knight on c7 is that it puts pressure on d5, which can hold up white's break with e5, and you're going to see that in our game. Also, having the knight on c7 keeps an eye on b5, so that in case white does commit to a premature a5, then black can have control over that square also. And this is a common theme, this idea with knight c7 and having the eye on b5 is a common theme with other lines. Sometimes the knight can be on f6 and end up on c7 with the same idea. Okay, and again, in our first video, we discussed the first idea in the classical line, which is to play a6 and bishop g4 with, of course, similar ideas of playing b5 and holding up white's e4, e5 advance, albeit in a more direct way by exchanging off the knight on f3. Now here we're going to see a different development. And the game we'll be looking at is from Dortmund 2001. Vladimir Kramnik has the white pieces and Veselin Topalov with the black pieces here. Game began d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e6, knight c3, e takes, c takes, d6, knight f3, g6, e4, bishop g7, bishop e2, castles, castles, and now rook e8 here, knight d2. All right, and now this move is a very logical way of defending e4. All right, at the right moment, white can go to c4 with his knight to exert pressure against this pawn on d6. And also, let me mention that this move queen c2 is not too good, because black can play this move knight a6. All right, with knight b4 on the table. All right, and then besides that, the move bishop g4 is also possible too, utilizing this first plan in the classical variation of taking away this f3 knight. So Kramnik played knight d2, so of course it prevents this idea and also adds some more protection to e4. And also white can play this move at some point and also fortify his center at f3. So this is a positional line that Kramnik is playing, and what would you expect? And remember too, this is 2001, so Kramnik at this time is world champion, and he's pretty much at the peak of his powers here. Knight a6. So here's the plan that I was talking about. f3. So now the center is fortified and rock solid for white. Okay, this firmly protects the e4 pawn, and so now this knight can move. So for instance, to c4. Don't worry, hold your horses. We'll be getting to the more aggressive lines like f4 and things like that later. Knight c7 from Topalov, and now a4. All right. So now black can decide between two different plans. He can keep to the original idea of knight a6, right, playing on the queen side, right, or just preparing, by preparing b5 as we see right here, or he can seek counterplay on the queen side by trying to set up this break f5 at some point, which would entail, of course, moving this knight. All right. So let's see what Topalov does. Knight d7. So he's setting up. He's setting up the move f5 here. All right. Again, the main alternative to this is to prepare b5, and usually the way this comes about is by b6, knight a4, and then the move bishop a6. Again, this bishop often is clumsily placed in these Benoni positions, and often it is a good idea to just eliminate it for a valuable piece. And in this case, it's this knight on c4, which exerts tremendous pressure here on the d pawn. Okay, so bishop g5, queen d7, and see the forces all coordinated and ready for the b5 push. So this is pretty much pretty flexible. And so black's idea is to eliminate this piece and then play a6 and b5. All right. And of course there's other useful moves, like for instance rook to b8, which also helps with the push b5. All right. So let us go back. To Kramnik's a4. Now Topalov chose knight d7 with this other plan of playing f5 in the center. Putting pressure on the center and on the queen side here. All right. Kramnik decides on king h1. Again, this Kramnik style is very positional, and this move is useful if the game opens up, because you can see the dark squares for white being quite vulnerable, because you see this big pawn chain right here is all on light squares. So he just scoots the king over, and it's a good safety move, to make sure the king doesn't get caught up in any unnecessary drama. b6, and now rook to a3. Back in 2001, this move was a novelty. All right, knight c4 was the main move that was often played here. Okay. Topalov played queen e7, and it wouldn't be right if I didn't show you the idea behind rook a3. Now, the basic idea behind this is to confront this move f5, which Topalov had been preparing. So say right here, if he just played f5, then you have e takes, g takes, knight c4 with the attack here. So knight e5, knight takes, bishop takes. Now f4 hitting the bishop, bishop to g7, knight b5, king h8, and now you can see this rook sliding across on the third rank. Rook g3, and now the white rook is transferred to the queen side, to the king side very quickly. So that's the idea behind that move. So after rook a3, Topalov slows things up a bit and just plays the move Queen E7. Very strong move. And what this does is simply put pressure down the E file, right, doubling up, and also protects D6, okay? And so this gives black a little more freedom when this move knight C4 comes, right? There won't be a big scramble to protect this pawn, so it's kind of like a prophylactic measure. Knight B5. Again, if knight C4, this newly found freedom that black has, since he doesn't have to worry about this anymore, he can just simply play his bishop to A6. So instead, Kramnik played knight B5. Knight takes B5. And bishop takes B5. Now, an option is to take with the pawn. But if A takes B5 here, then F5 can be played. Alright, that shouldn't cause too much trouble for black there, because black has sufficient counterplay after F5. So Kramnik decided on bishop takes B5. Rook D8. Now Kramnik had said later that Rook F8 was preferable, and that will strengthen this F5 advance, and in the future. Standing up for the text move is that what it does is make future E5 more difficult for white because of the pressure here on D5. So both moves have their good points. A5, A6. Now, again, this opening is very dynamic. So black is not afraid of worsening his pawn structure because it allows open files on the queen side. So there's a lot of give and take in this opening. So don't say, "Wow, you're ruining the pawn." You're ruining the pawn structure. You can't really think like that. You have to think in terms of activity. It's all about activity with black in this opening. So A5, A6, bishop C6, rook B8, A takes, and now knight takes B6. B3, and now bishop E5. Okay, the idea is to play the queen to H4 and to literally provoke F4. Okay. Another possibility instead of bishop E5 is to move knight D7. Coming to E5 here. So after knight C4, knight E5, knight A5, okay, would be risky after queen H4. And so you have all these pieces on the queen side and black building up on the king side. So that's very double-edged also. Instead, bishop E5 was played. F4, and now bishop G7. And now Kramnik seizes the moment and plays F5. And this move is necessary because, for instance, if white still tried to stick for the E5 maneuver and play queen C2, for example, so that could be meant by F5, where this pawn cannot be pushed. So Kramnik is able to adjust on the fly and plays the move f5. Of course, there's pros and cons. The dark squares are weakened even more by this advance. Knight d7, going to try to take advantage of these dark squares, and now bishop takes d7. So this stops the knight from finding a home here. Bishop d7, queen f3, bishop d4 from Topalov, getting the bishop out before this move happens. So f6, and now the give and take, right? White's e4, e5 advance has been halted, but now the safety of the black king is compromised. So queen f8, and so black has to be very careful of his king safety. Now knight c4, bishop b5. Again, now this bishop finally finds something to do. Bishop e3. And now Topalov decides to play bishop takes e3. Now, that's not a forced exchange here. Rook e8 was suggested, and putting more pressure on e4. And now if bishop takes d4, c takes d4, queen d3, there could follow queen h6, and queen d4, and then queen h4 with this pressure here. Of course, this can't happen because of queen takes on e1. And of course, the knight can't move because bishop takes f1. Topalov decides on the exchange. Queen takes e3, and now he plays this move e5. All right, and of course he wants to control the h6 square to keep white from penetrating with queen h6. Kramnik plays h4, and now king h7. Rook fa1, bishop takes c4, b takes c4, and now what do we have here? The b takes c4. Rook to b5, attacking this pawn. Rook c3, and rook e8. Again, preventing this break e5. And you can see how important that theme is in the Benoni. It constantly comes up, stopping the break e4, e5. And black's argument at this point is trying to prove that these pawns are weak. Rook takes a6. Right, so black gives up a pawn. Now, this happens to be a mistake by Kramnik. All right, because it gives up the back rank. Remember, the Benoni is dynamic. It's a dynamic defense. Always going to be opportunities for sacrifice of pawns and material. Rook b1 check, king h2, and now rook f1. Now, how does white defend the f6 pawn now? There is no way to protect it. Rook ca3. If rook b3, with the idea of meeting rook takes f6 with e5, then black would simply just play rook takes e5. Okay. And this is going to be better for the black side here. So instead, rook c a3 was played. Topalov snatched up the pawn. And now e5 was played. Again, black wants to play this move. So simply e5, willing to sacrifice the pawn. Topalov played rook f5, attacking the pawn. If he tried to take, rook takes e5, loses actually after queen takes, d takes, and rook takes f6. All right. So this is not what black wants to go into. All right. Where are we at here? So rook takes f6, e5, rook f5, and now e6. Okay, so with this move, Kramnik is able to achieve counterplay in the position. So for example, if he tried to play, if Kramnik had played rook d6 here, rook takes d6, then play can continue rook e takes e5, queen takes c5, and unfortunately for white, he would end up in a mating net after queen e7, followed by rook e1. So this is why Kramnik did not take this pawn on d6. Instead, he played the move e6, and then after f takes e6, rook a7, king g8, queen g3, queen to f6, and just note, black has to stop the white queen from getting the g5. So for instance, if he had played this move, rook f6, then queen g5, with the threat of rook to f3, and let's say for example king h8, rook a8, and then the black position is critical. So for instance, after like rook here, and all this is forced, check, and black is close to losing. So even at this stage of the game, black has to be very careful here. So after queen g3, excuse me, let me just fix it. So after queen, after f takes e6, rook a7 check, king g3, queen here, g3, queen f6, and now rook a8, rook takes check, king g7, rook a7, and king g8. And Kramnik secured enough counterplay to draw the game. So that does it for part 2. And again, we're still dealing with the classical variation. There is one more major plan that black employs in this position, and we will be looking at that on the next video. But for this video, just be reminded that this video is dealing with the plan for black of knight a6 and knight c7, with the main ideas to prepare the pawn push b5, and with the added benefit of pressuring d5. So I hope you enjoyed that game, and I will see you on part 3.